And so therefore, I'm calling this commission to order. And I see that all commissioners are here except for Commissioner Janae. You have that?
Yep.
I'd like to remind everybody in the audience to please turn your cell phones off and make sure that they're at least not going to ring during the meeting so that we're not disrupted. I don't know how to do this. I'm doing it to mine because I cannot. And I can't find it, so I'll just turn it off. All right. Next on the agenda is public comments on items not on the agenda. And I only have one item so far. And Catherine, cheers. Oh, I forgot my speaker.
Should I just start, or?
Yeah, do you have the timer, James?
I was looking, I didn't see it, so.
That's all right. He'll. Do you want to do like
2 minutes.
He'll do 2 minutes to go or 2 minutes done. 1 minute to go.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he'll put up one. Means you have 1 more minute.
Okay. Hello, my name is Catherine Wurzburg. I live at 871 Terrace Drive. And after reviewing the minutes for the last many months as they relate to Loyola Corners and the proposed buildings there, I'd like to address what I consider to be an enormous misconception about Loyola Corners. Bandied about are terms like dated, shabby backwater. We need to breathe vitality into Loyola Corners. Businesses are struggling. Loyola Corners is in crisis. This does a disservice to the businesses in Loyola Corners that are thriving, and yes, there are quite a few. Tom's Depot is a long-time neighborhood institution beloved by residents. The current owners have been there for 14 years, which in itself is remarkable considering that there's a 90% failure rate in the restaurant business. Loyola Beauty Salon has developed an extremely loyal clientele in the 4 years it has been in the long vacant space that was previously Wolf Camera. I was in Cafe Vitali recently, and I was really pleasantly surprised at their upgraded menu and how warmly the staff greeted us, because I hadn't really felt that before. PhysioFit is a hidden jewel of Loyola Corners. They are highly regarded by the local medical establishment who recommends them to their patients because of their outstanding physical therapists. JP Liquors is the go-to place in our neighborhood for beverages, snacks, ice, and of course their delicious taqueria. And a newcomer, Arete Dance Center, is thriving. And of course, the Bicycle Outfitter, which brings cyclists from all over the area to Loyola Corners. Currently, there is only one vacant building for lease in Loyola Corners. And that is not what I call a crisis. You talk about the need to redevelop Loyola Corners and tearing down successful businesses without seeming to care about the small business owners who run them. Are you dismissing their contributions to the community because the buildings are old? These are small businesses that are doing well and offering quality products and services. And I equate this with what we parents used to say about the Los Altos public schools before they were remodeled. My kids are 25 and 29, so that was quite a while ago. The schools were built in the 1950s and looked dated on the outside, but we knew that the instruction inside was top-notch. The dated buildings didn't affect the ratings of Los Altos schools as being some of the best in the state. Oh, I just wanted to comment that there's another way of looking at Loyola Corners and that it's not in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. The other speaker I have is Rena Rogas. And same thing, I'll give you a 1 minute signal when you have 1 minute left.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to thank you guys all for your hard work. I love Los Altos. So I just wanted to point out that fact that there are not so many transportations here in Los Altos. I'm a former Foothill College student, and I used to take buses all the time. And I just felt a little inconvenient just to get around Los Altos, Mountain View area just by buses. And also I wanted to point out the improvement of schedule of the buses and hygiene, because that is a reason why many people don't take transportations. And also, I wish that there are a lot more buses around, like I said, so people want to take more public transportations. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other comments from the public on things that are not on the agenda? Seeing none. Oh, no, she's sitting down. I will close public comment. Next item for action is the consent calendar, of which the Planning and Transportation Commission minutes is the only thing. Are there any corrections? We don't have James back.
Just fired up the AC.
Yeah, he just turned on the AC.
Fired it up.
So I close public comment, James, and
I move that we accept the Planning and Transportation Commission minutes of the meeting of June 4th as presented.
Second?
is there any other conversation about the minutes? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nobody abstaining?
Actually, it's Thursday,
Oh.
June 18th. Forgive me, I misread the date.
Thursday, June 18th, you're right. Motion carries unanimously. Would like to mention that Commissioner Junaid is now here, which brings us to item number 2 on the agenda, zoning code cleanup changes, and I'll let you lead us, James.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Planning and Transportation Commission. These are a series of zoning ordinance cleanups that we are presenting for recommendation to the City Council. This is something that staff regularly does as we come across areas of the code that aren't quite clear or could be updated. We kind of compile that list, and then we regularly bring these before the Commission for consideration. So there's several of them, but they're all fairly straightforward. The first one is expanding the definition of personal services to match what our current practice is. We get a fair number of tutoring center business license applications, and we categorize those as a personal service, but it's not specifically called out in our definition, as well as pet grooming businesses. So those are those are classifications that we're currently doing. They're just not specified in the zoning code, so we are recommending that those be included in our definitions of personal service. So if there's any questions about that specific. Okay.
I got a question.
You want to turn your mic on?
Oh,
No worries.
I know I always harp on this, but is there, in retail, just because they all come under this category that's acceptable to the zoning, it doesn't mean that the parking that one would use would be acceptable to the other. So do each of them carry their own separate category for parking?
Personal services are all parked the same at 4 spaces per 1,000. Retail intensive is parked at 5 spaces for 1,000. Extensive, like furniture stores, are parked at 2 spaces. So yes, they're uniform. Okay. And then restaurant has its own parking standards.
That makes sense. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, the next one is just clarifying our expectations for landscaping in the single-family residential districts. The city has historically interpreted the 50% hardscape / impervious requirement to mean that the 50% that is impervious should also be landscaped, but the word landscape is never used in the ordinance. So we just simply wanted to add that term. One of the things that if we weren't in a drought condition many years ago, we probably would have recommended that we just take the term pervious out altogether and just say 50% shall be landscape. But given the conditions currently, we do recommend keeping that 50% may be hardscape, but a minimum of 50% needs to be softscape and landscape.
I have a question. Softscape is not a term of use in my business, and I have some concerns. If the goal is you want to have planting, then you need to say pervious planting materials, because otherwise someone could completely pave their front yard with pervious concrete paving, which we're using a lot now because of the water
Right.
usage, and we would have no greenery whatsoever.
Right.
So the question is, what is the goal?
And I understand that certain hardscapes can be, to an extent, pervious, but that's not our acceptable definition. Our definition
Maybe you need
is...
to say pervious planting
Yeah, but
material.
that's what she's saying. If that's not what your intent is, then it needs to be more clearly
If you say
stated.
pervious planting materials, so we know that mulch is allowed, as opposed to green, I think you need to be really clear, because pervious hardscape is a term of art now relative to the requirements of water
It is.
usage for the state.
So, and we can use those terms if it's clear. One thing I would refer the commission to is this one page that was distributed, which actually goes to what we were trying to accomplish, because the language that was drafted really focuses on hardscape. Simply put, the goal is that half of the front yard needs to be landscaped. But now that we are in drought conditions, we do allow mulch, loose rock, and then typically there's landscaping around the perimeter versus, requiring, as we used to, that the entire front yard be lawn and landscaped, so.
So I like this alternative language because it's pretty short and sweet and to the point, but I would add, is it possible just to say shall be pervious planting material in landscape?
You
Yeah,
can say
that'd be good.
pervious landscape materials.
Yeah, pervious landscape materials, okay.
With high
Would that
verbosity.
also talk about landscaping then?
Because landscaped means planting.
Right.
But if you say pervious
Pervious-
landscape materials, that's mulch, rocks, something that's not
Plants.
concrete paving, which is
And
my
landscaping,
concern.
because we still want to see some
Yes, I
degree
think
of...
it's both.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. That'll work.
So
Yeah,
what's the
I
final?
like it. What I was recommending is a minimum of 50% of the required front yard shall be pervious landscape material and landscaping,
Or landscape.
Perfect,
or landscaping.
that's good. Okay, the next one is relative to basements, and when we drafted the basement updates many years ago, the intent was that the basement needs to be under the footprint of the house itself, and then light wells can extend beyond the footprint of the house itself. But because the language is not crystal clear, we are allowing basements that go beyond the footprint of the house. We had one case, for example, where the second-story balcony came out, and the basement was allowed to extend out to the edge of that second-story balcony, because that was the
House.
And that wasn't the intent, so we just want to add the language,
The light well or the basement?
the basement itself.
Basement itself.
So we just simply want to add the language floor area footprint, which is the intent of this ordinance, that the basement, not the light wells, but the physical basement stays within the footprint of the actual house itself.
And
The first floor area.
And the first floor footprint. Is
Yes,
that correct?
exactly.
Okay.
Right.
That's clarity.
Yeah, in fact, we should add that.
I
Right, you
was
should-
going to suggest that. That
Yes.
was my remark here, because it says beyond the floor area footprint,
Right.
right? And in
first
other,
floor,
First
other
floor.
cities or towns like Los Altos Hills, you're allowed to add under the second-story overhang. So I think we should clarify
Yeah.
first
floor.
Floor area.
footprint, so there's no
Under A.
confusion there.
We will add that. That's a good point. And then the second part of this one is we have been getting requests to, once a project's been approved and it has an open light well, to then put decking on top of the light well and essentially enclose that light well so it really becomes an extension of the basement itself. And so the code doesn't explicitly address that, so we do want to say that light wells need to remain open at least 75%. So 75% would still allow some,
Decks or bridges or something to go over.
bridges, bay window extensions, but at least 75% of that light well would have to remain open. So now we have a standard that we can share with residents.
Otherwise, the purpose is pretty defeated, isn't it?
And then you have a dark well.
Yeah, otherwise, yeah, you're getting, and we're not allowing them, but we're having discussions at the front counter with homeowners about why, and we don't have clear language about why they cannot do that, so.
I
Okay.
like the language, clarifies it.
The next one is just applying our narrow lot standards to the R120 district that we have had in place for many years for our R110 district. So the minimum lot width in an R120 district is 100 feet. If you have a pre-existing lot and say it's 80 feet wide, this would allow you to use 10% of the lot width for your side yard setback, 8 feet, and then you increase that by 7.5 feet for the second floor. So it'd be 8 feet and 15.5 feet.
Makes sense.
And then the next one, What this one is addressing is when we adopted this code fairly recently, it stated that, and this came from concerns from the Planning Commission, that if you have an existing home and you're modifying more than 50% of the existing home, you have to either bring it into conformance with setback requirements or apply for a variance, because we were getting very major remodels that were retaining existing nonconformities. What this expands, and it's also more consistent with our building codes, is that if you have an existing home and say you're only altering 25% of that existing home, but you're also adding 25% of new square footage, that would also trigger this requirement. So it just expands that a little bit, but also makes it consistent with our building codes. And the applicants still have the opportunity to request a variance if it's reasonable, if it's an appropriate request.
This is kind of different than any other city, though.
This is what?
I mean, this will be kind of just for Los Altos then, right? I mean, if you look at any other city, this is kind of a pretty standard approach for non-conforming setbacks.
50% of the then existing, not the...
Existing, like Los Gatos, even in Los Altos, so far, it used to be that if 50% of the existing is retained, or 50% of the roof is retained, you can keep
The non-conformity.
So I'm just bringing
Even
it
if
up.
that 50% then becomes...
What we are saying is that if you
25%.
add 50% or anything compared to that footprint, then you have to confirm. And I know in
It says,
Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills, this is not the case.
it says addition, removal, or replacement.
So the difference is, originally what it used to be that if it's 1,000 square feet, and if your existing 500 or whatever, 600 can remain, then you can keep your old
So
situation.
it was a loophole in there. Staff wants
Yeah.
to close it, is the bottom line, basically. Because in the county, both counties, if you improve more than 50, if you change more than 50%, you have to go back and make the whole structure conforming. That's been on the books in both San Mateo and Santa Clara County for decades. And so this is a loophole. People were saying, well,
Well-
a little here and a little there, and
This was really, the original ordinance was driven by the commission. These amendments were really driven by staff, partly to be consistent with the building codes, but that is a good point. The original intent of the code was if you have a 2,000 square foot house and you're modifying 1,000 square feet of it, then you should you should either bring the house into conformance or apply for a variance. What this would say is if you have a 2,000 square foot house and you're essentially not even touching it, but you're adding a 1,050 square foot addition off of the other corner,
You need to
that those
comply.
same rules would apply. You'd either have to bring the house into conformance. So it is a more strict standard.
I just personally, I feel it won't be an easy thing to apply to all the structures, right? You have
Well,
corner lots which have issues, and sometimes, I mean, some projects where people have been living in it for 30-some years, and they don't want to touch the existing, but they want to add something on the side, and now you're actually coming back and touching the existing, where in the olden times it was allowed. So I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just saying we should be a little bit careful that if you do approve this, it really does affect quite a few properties.
well, really, the
Wouldn't it-
question is whether staff, the greater staff input is to bring houses into conformance. That's what the planning code always wants. Zoning wants everything to be conforming. The question is, by doing this, are you creating potential for a lot of variances?
I think we will, if you have an existing house and you're not touching the house and you're adding off of the back of it, for example, you would apply for a variance. You're not going to,
I can see a lot
But a
of
variance
variances coming
is
in.
a discretionary, you're not guaranteed to get it. It's a
Right.
process, and it requires money, and it requires time, and it requires
Phoebe, what I'm getting
professional
at is that
assistance, so
we might be, I mean, I just want to make sure we are looking at it from every angle, because there are a lot of people who might just remodel, versus now we might be pushing people to just rebuild.
Well, is this
So-
a particular, issue that we can maybe have staff come back to us with a little bit more information about? Like, how many
I don't know how
homes
everybody
does this
feels.
affect in a
We won't know.
typical year?
Well,
And what are our neighboring cities doing?
We won't know how many it
No, in the
affects.
they'll
Yeah.
know, I mean,
In the past, yeah.
This is coming up, something precipitated this, right? Presumably a number of projects, or a project brought to light this issue. So I'm curious, we're making a big change to fix a
Right,
really
right.
small issue. And what
I think-
are our neighboring towns doing?
Yeah,
I think this one is probably the least important when balancing it with the effects of adopting it. This was really an internal amendment intended to make the zoning code more consistent with the building code requirements, but they're not the same thing. They don't necessarily have to have the same parameters. I think this would likely result in more variances. And how many?
Depends on what-
Probably a handful a year.
So James, my question really is, if people are gaming the system, I mean, we know people don't tear down, they tear down the entire house, they leave the chimney so that they can retain.
that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Well,
That was the original game
That
of the
was,
system.
that was the gaming of the rules. And my question is, if people are using this to game the rules, then we need to address it. But otherwise, I guess I would ask the question, is there an urgency to change it?
No, and I think that's accurate. The rules were changed years ago to address, the essentially reconstruction of an entire house and leaving up one wall that was non-conforming. But this is different. You could leave a house entirely intact and add on to the back
You
of the
have to
house, and
comply.
then that would trigger this requirement.
So,
And would you ask for a variance? I mean, if somebody said, I want to leave the building as it is, or I want to leave it in non-conforming, then they would have to ask for a variance for that
They
project.
would, and I would imagine they're
What would be
largely
their
going to
basis?
they're largely going to get approved, because you're saying, well, the house has been there since 1950, and I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
adding
I
But
guess
that's,
my-
but
So
the
my-
basis, when you go for variance, your basis has to be on whether you are unable to enjoy the same
So my
substantial
question
rights
is-
as your adjacent properties. If everybody is non-conforming in that area, and some of the stuff that was adopted into Los Altos from county, for example, there are several zones I can think of where everybody's non-conforming.
yep.
Right.
And so you couldn't use that as basis, and then what do you say?
So the reason I'm bringing it up is not more, I can already see a lot of variances coming in, but I'm looking at there is still a very large population of old residents in this city. And some of them, and we are recently working on where they don't have that many funds, but they do want where the kids are making a separate unit so somebody at home can stay with them and take care of them. And what I'm saying is I can just see these kind of stories coming forward for variances. And now we are having them touch the entire house. I'm not saying yes or no. I honestly think we should look at this a little bit more before we approve this part of it, is just what I'm bringing up.
Right, the scenario I'm imagining is where someone has a side yard setback that is 2 feet too close.
Yeah.
And they are doing a major addition. The major addition is going to be in the back and on the other side,
And then
not offensive to anyone and conforming entirely. And then they're going to have to come in for a variance and
redo.
hopefully get it, but it could be subjective. So I'd hate to put someone in that
We
position.
could pull this
That's
out
what I was going to wonder.
and separate
Have
it
a
from the-
separate conversation
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it.
I didn't mean to make it such a big deal.
No,
I
but if
think we
it's a
should
big
look at it
issue, and
a little bit.
I mean,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, it's nice that there is a variance being asked rather than just not doing anything and having the building go up, and
Right.
so
But my
it's a bigger
question-
conversation.
My question would be, the other you either don't change the language, you do change the language as proposed, or you adjust the language so that you eliminate most instances where people have to go for a variance.
Right.
So if you discuss the fact that, if it's, as Ronit said, if it meets a certain threshold, then it's automatically allowed. So
But for
that we
that, we
don't
need a little
unduly
bit-
burden people to have
We
to
just
get a
need a little
variance.
bit more
So we'll leave this
research
as
and
a
data on
future
it.
I would
agenda
say,
item,
yeah,
and then I don't know.
pull this out of the ordinance amendments, and we'll come back with more information.
More, how many?
We'll come back with data, and
That'd be great.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Swimming
On to the
pool.
swimming pools.
okay, this one will be a little bit simpler. This literally reflects the city's practice since our codes were adopted. It just clarifies that swimming pool setbacks are measured to the outer surface of the pool structure.
So it's not the coping.
It's the outer
the-
edge of the,
yeah.
and that's how we do it today, but it doesn't say that.
I'm good with that.
Okay. The next one is just cleaning up a section of the administrative offices district to match our other zoning districts in terms of consistency. Banks and travel agencies are already considered as administrative office uses, so we're just recommending that those two definitions be struck, and they do fall under office-administrative uses. It's in our definition, so it's just redundant. And then the next one, this was our recently adopted medical office and medical clinic ordinance. And when we adopted it, we applied it to all of our commercial districts just in that manner. And when it was codified by our publishers, it didn't include the downtown Main Street and State Street, that they can't be located on the ground floor. So that's all that's acknowledging. They're allowed in those conditions if they're above the ground floor. They're not allowed on the ground floor.
So in item H, there's this word "and" at the end, and I didn't know if that means there's more to come after that.
There's further language in
Okay,
that.
that's
yeah.
fine.
3 dots.
3 dots, yeah.
And then the next one's probably the most important one. This ordinance has been on the books since the city incorporated. And when the city incorporated, the intent was that all non-conforming buildings in Los Altos would be amortized and go away over a period of time. So if it was a minor structure with a valuation of $500 or less, it was supposed to go away by 1961. If it was a larger structure, including up to an office building, then there would be a legal process to put them on notice that that building was going to be amortized and have to go away over a period of time. So there's two things here. Number one, the city has no desire or expectation to identify every non-conforming commercial building and try to go through the legal process to have it go away. Secondly, we have no desire to go survey the 12,000 plus parcels in town and find out how many non-conforming garden sheds might exist in Los Altos. And then thirdly, it's never been enforced. The 1961 deadline is clearly long past, and the fact that over the decades it hasn't been enforced, there's a whole issue of whether we could even legally enforce this ordinance any longer. But since it is on the books, residents will sometimes come across this, and it raises expectations that we can have their neighbor's garden shed go away or something. So we're recommending, and the city attorney supports it, striking this this whole section.
This is like spring cleaning.
It is.
50 years, I
Yeah.
like it.
And then the next one is real straightforward. It just clarifies that the height limitations for towers, spires, cupolas, et cetera, are for the non-single-family residential districts, which is
Rats.
what it is. So we're just inserting that language in there. And then the next one is a subject that the commission has recently discussed, which is including solar and photovoltaic panels as being exempt from the height limit and allowed to go up to 8 feet above the roof, just like mechanical equipment is. So that was the language that we talked about recently and that the commission asked us to move forward with.
So, James, I have a question on that. As I recall, in the original discussion of that item for the building on Main Street, I was under the impression that if we were going to allow solar and photovoltaic panels, we would require some sort of shrouding of the structure holding them in place. I seem to recall that was, and I don't see that language in this.
So we can talk about that tonight. There's a couple of things. Number one, it's difficult to screen, solar panels in particular, photovoltaic, because you don't necessarily want to block them. Secondly, we're prohibited from doing design review, so that might be overreaching our design review authority on these. And then there's the issue of, is a solar panel really aesthetically, that much of a concern compared to mechanical equipment that you want to have it screened?
Yeah. I was just asking because that was raised originally, that it wasn't the solar panel per se, it was the mechanical support underneath it that was somehow going to be shrouded. I thought that was.
So, John, if I remember what I remember with that project, you had brought that up, and I think staff clarified to us that we can maybe request, but it's not something we can put in because the state requirement on the solar would not allow us to. I'm pretty sure that was the thing.
Well, I was just unclear.
Yeah.
So
And the ordinance still does require that electrical or mechanical equipment, so support equipment, we would still have that opportunity if it's
Right.
not the panel itself. It's
well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking, because there was some confusion as to what could or should be screened or shrouded and what could or shouldn't be, and I'm just looking to make sure that whatever we have, it's clear.
Yeah, I think we still have that ability for the support equipment.
The support equipment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's at the staff level discretionary? Is that how it would be handled?
It would be both at staff level and at commission level if it's a project that comes before the commission.
Okay.
James? This is borders on obsessive compulsive, but they're really solar thermal and solar photovoltaic, and maybe it might be a good idea to just fix that.
Okay.
Because one is used to heat water and the other is used to generate electricity. They're both actually solar panels, but one is the solar thermal, I think, is what you're referring
Okay.
to.
All right, we'll make that clarification. Okay. All right.
All right.
The next one, currently in our zoning code, staff has the authority to approve common parking facilities. So a typical situation would be a business leases a parking lot that's across the street from the business. It has to be within a certain number of feet. It's less than 400 feet. And through a recorded deed restriction, they can use that parking lot for their business purposes. And we have approved one of these within the last couple of years. We did it at staff level, and then it came to Commission's attention, and the Commission was a little bit concerned about that. So all we're saying is that when we do approve these common parking facility agreements, that it be an application made to the Planning and Transportation Commission. So it's considered at a public meeting and everybody knows about it.
So if I have a building in downtown Los Altos that was built with 4 per 1,000 parking, all right? So I have 10,000 square feet and I have 40 parking spaces, right? So my neighbor doesn't have any parking and comes to me and says, I want to lease some of your parking stalls. Doesn't that change my ratio in my building?
Yeah, that wouldn't work. It would have to be surplus parking.
Oh.
Yeah,
Is
you
that
would
word in
have
there?
to. The old Z's restaurant, for example, before the new building was built on Shasta, that was a parking lot, and Z's restaurant leased that parking lot. It was just a parking lot. It was tied to that restaurant.
Well, then we ought to be sure that it's classified as surplus parking.
Yeah, okay.
I have a point I want to make about this provision. Having gotten an education on parking, being part of the parking subcommittee and the subcommittee of the subcommittee, the Parking and Loop program, I see and this isn't something, I agree with the change we're making now, but something I want to sort of throw out, maybe we discuss in the future, is 300 is, in my mind, overly restrictive and sort of inefficient. I mean, it's really a neighbor helping a neighbor. But if we have locations where we have abundant parking and someone is more than 300 feet, it would be efficient for us to actually have these agreements be able to work in those situations, because they could put their employees further out, right, on the outskirts of our town, and then the spots with, closer would be dedicated to customers. And that seems a much more efficient use of our excessive parking, because from what I understand, we have private parking facilities throughout our downtown that are at 40% capacity. So this is an opportunity for us to be more efficient with our parking, but not if it's within a 300-foot.
And my only comment on that would be, we also have parking for employees, and employees don't want to park that far away, and therefore the city is constantly playing this game of people moving their cars in the parking lots every 3 hours. And my concern with, in theory, it's great, but what happens is, and I have no idea what the magical number is, at some distance away, people decide that it's easier just to park their car and move it. And so I think what the right distance is unclear, and there's got to be some sort of enforcement mechanism so that the city isn't playing parking cop
But-
if we're going to do that.
So,
That would
John,
just be
is-
my observation.
Part of the same subcommittee, but different subcommittee.
Subcommittee?
On the parking committee, we've gone around and surveyed business owners, and it's interesting because there are a number of employees that don't play the shuttle game. What they do is they park on the
Residential street.
residential streets farther away.
I know that for a fact.
Right, and
Thank
then
you.
they walk. So that's beyond the 300, that's back to Renit's point, it's beyond 300 feet. They're not playing the shuttle game, it's actually,
Right.
they want someplace they can park and leave their car.
And I think
All
we
day.
have to think about it. If they have a financial thing involved in this, they'll make sure they're using it. They're not going to pay and not have
There was a private
anybody.
parking lot where they
Right.
would have.
Yeah,
protected
they'll
access.
probably use it.
But keep in mind, the challenge here is, there's a difference between who owns the building and the tenant who leases the building. And, the city deals with this all the time. You can, a builder, a developer may say, well, that's just fine, but when they lease the space or it gets subleased, it's a game of cat and mouse. And so all I'm saying is, I agree with you, we should be more efficient with parking. What that magical distance away from the actual office or retail space is, I don't know.
How did that
And-
number come to be, James?
300 to 400 feet is a very kind of widely accepted design standard for customer parking, that a customer doesn't want to park more than 300, 400 feet from the store or restaurant that they're going to. But employee parking is very different.
So if I owned a building on that fronted First Street, as an example, and I needed parking, could I go to the church on University, 300 or 400 feet away, because they don't use their parking during the day? It's normally on weekends, et cetera. And would the city view my negotiation with the church as them having excess parking during the day? And because they're 300 or 400 feet away, would that pass?
Well, again, this standard is for customers, for shoppers, for restaurant visitors, guests. A parking management plan where your employees are parking at Lincoln Park and then being brought to a site, it could be any distance at that point. And we did approve a parking management plan for the Packard Foundation.
Yes.
And it's,
That was my
it's
next
u-
comment.
Yeah, it's unique to that business. They shuttle their employees from Caltrain, and they have several other measures. That's very different than this standard. This is saying parking lot proximity for customers, for shoppers to a business.
So the
wonder
question
if-
I have is like, so you've written 300. I like Ronit's concept that at least we have some flexibility, and you mentioned 300 to 400. I mean, if that's kind of the standard, can we go to the 400 marker
Or can we strike this whole line? I guess that's.
and leave it up for
Yeah.
review?
I think for customer shopping, you don't want to imply that they're going to park at Lincoln Park and then walk to a business on First Street. I just don't think that's realistic.
Though
I
I
don't
think
either.
maybe
That's why.
300 is
But it would fit
outdated.
within this rule.
Well, why don't we, the direction can be that we'll research, ULI and other standards in terms of what, because it is in that range. It's 400 plus or minus feet is typically what is used.
but have a little better language so nobody's going across Foothill too far.
So with the recommendation, the change that you want to add, I think nobody's talked about that.
Right.
The thing is that in this section 14.74.170, common parking facilities, there's a sentence in here about the distance away, and we'd like to have that reviewed
Well,
on another agenda.
We'll research sort of industry examples and provide those and make it.
So
We
my
can accept the change.
my observation would be, there's a difference between employee parking and customer parking.
Correct.
And employee parking, there's some number that James will come up with. I think there's always the opportunity to be more flexible on employee parking, but there needs to be an enforcement mechanism, and it can't be the city. And that's my only point on employee parking, because it is a problem in this city. I mean, to say it isn't, we're ignoring the fact that people are regularly moving their cars, employees are regularly moving their cars every 3 hours in the parking plaza. And it's taking away parking from everybody else, because they're not using their underground parking garage, or they're jamming more people in their office than they're supposed to be. And that's reality. That's what happens in this town.
But I'm saying actually the opposite. When we surveyed employees, it was more they're using the white dot program or they're parking in residential streets. Very few, other than Spots, who has a lot of high school kids, are moving their cars. So that was
Come out to the
something
parking
that was.
plaza with me.
Okay.
I'll show you an example of at least one business that's got at least a dozen cars that they're moving every 3 hours.
I'd be happy.
But the point of this was we were adding line B.
Yeah.
I mean,
Correct.
We were,
And then-
I mean, we happen to focus in on Section A, but in fact,
We're
the
adding
cleanup
line
of
B.
amendments is to add B and
Good point.
change the language to cover a common parking facility instead of off-site parking spaces. So in fact, discussing A is not on the agenda tonight.
Right, which is why we're saying that could we
That
make that a
James
future
should
agenda
make
item?
their future agenda, but in
No, I think
terms of.
we can talk about that. It's on, it was published, and it's on the agenda. It's part of the
good.
published text. And we can look at, the ITE, ULI, other standards, and find out what sort of that, it's going to be around, I think, 400 feet versus 300.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth looking at because we do have employee parking, but we also have customer parking. And, University Avenue, Palo Alto has the same situation. When we used to be in the office there 15 years ago, I'll be the first one to tell you, I moved my car all the time, but I gave up after a month. And I walked and parked where I was supposed to park because it was just, I was sick of getting tickets. That's the only way they make money down there, I think.
But the thing is, really, James, for purposes of tonight, could we recommend to City Council that they approve B and C change of language and note that we would like as a future agenda item to have A reviewed by staff to come back to us? Because I'm always looking at what we're going to do tonight.
Right.
I think we can do this investigation as this goes up to the city council. I think we can be specific that we'll refer to the Institute of Traffic Engineers Manual and the Urban Land Institute Manual, and we'll present those two numbers to the city council, and we'll make a recommendation which of those numbers should be used. So that's pretty specific.
Okay.
And then when we do have parking management programs for employees, the Packard Foundation is a very good example for other businesses to follow. They do have to provide a report to the city quarterly that they're complying with that program. So there is a mechanism to measure that and to check it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, the last one is the simplest. This is just referencing the correct chapter of our new sign ordinance.
I think I have a problem with that. No.
So then, do you need us to make a motion to approve what we just heard, and except for the item?
Yeah, a motion to recommend approval to the city council with the exception of the section regarding the 50% nonconforming, which we're going to pull and
Right.
bring back to the planning commission with further analysis, and then that we study the published ITE and ULI standards for distances from commercial buildings.
And then we have a couple of things in the softscape, landscape, we have
Yeah, and all the
revised
changes that were-
language, and we have the changes in to make sure the first floor footprint deals with light wells.
And the solar
And the
language.
solar be
Thermal.
both thermal and photovoltaic, and we have all those little bitty ones.
Yes, we have those recorded, so those will all be in the ordinance that goes to the city council.
Cool.
So is there?
So isn't that a motion that should be made?
Yes,
I heard Phoebe make a motion.
I move that we recommend approval of the amendments as we discussed, with those small changes that have been recorded, and with the removal of the threshold for correcting nonconforming setbacks in R1 districts, pending further discussion with staff.
I'll second that.
Any more conversation, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next item is item number 3 on the Loyalist specific plan and the report from the subcommittee, and I have a number of public speakers. So before I begin the public comment part, I just wanted to give everybody an update of what happened so far so that everybody's aware. The subcommittee met, and we went through kind of an outline of what we wanted to approach for the specific plan, and what we noted was that Appendix B, the sales tax appendix, and there was a bunch of it in there, was grossly outdated, and we asked staff to give us an update to that, and what came back was that a lot of the information that was there prior cannot be disclosed, so therefore we need to meet again to talk about what we want to go forward. So we're working on figuring out another date to meet, is what I would say.
Correct.
Before you continue, I'm going to recuse myself
Oh.
from this discussion.
Okay.
You have
So-
to explain why you're recusing yourself.
I'm recusing myself because I have an ownership interest in 1000 Fremont Avenue in Loyola Corners.
So just, that's where we stand. So I have a number of public speakers that would like to talk about this item. So I guess we go through this.
Do you want to put a time limit to it?
I have 9 speakers, so they're still under the threshold for 3 minutes? Okay. So I'm going to start off, if I could have the next speaker speak up there, and that would be great, so we can move through this pretty quickly.
I have a question.
Sure.
Was there a report or something?
No, we've just met, and you just heard where our status is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So what I said is the subcommittee met, we looked at the specific plan, we identified that we need more information regarding Appendix B, and that we've asked staff for that information. Staff said they cannot give us all that information, and so now we need to meet again to talk about what we want to do to move forward.
So we need to do a little bit more research before we come back on this.
So that's where it stands?
And just to be clear for the public, when the subcommittee is ready to make a recommendation to the commission, any recommendation would go to the city council for action before we would launch any kind of a project undertaking, so.
Correct, and we also said that the subcommittee would provide a report that would be given to the public to look at, so that before it gets presented to this commission, so that everybody's aware of what's
So
being
I
talked
want to
about.
clarify, though, one
Sure.
thing. I think when we had the discussion, the idea, and just for clarification, the thought process was the subcommittee, us, would put this thing together and then bring it to the commission as whole.
Right,
And the commission would have a discussion before we actually put
Exactly.
something formal together, which can go to the public or anything. I mean, it's more of a discussion first
right.
amongst all of us. Is that correct?
That's what I was,
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that was good. That was
Yes, it's
useful.
not that we're going to
yeah,
put
here,
some
we're gonna-
report outside, and then the commission is going to see, first we will discuss.
Yeah.
We need the input of the other 3, and then once something concrete comes out of it, then the report goes out.
Yeah.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, just wanted to
That's- I'm
clarify.
glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
So I have 9 speakers to talk about the subject, and I'll just, so Steve Wurzburg, you're first. We're going to have to give you a 1-minute thing, and then Tom Ferry, you're next.
I'll withdraw my request, given what the report was just.
Okay,
Anyone
and
ask
who's
anybody
this?
else wants to do that, too.
Steve Worsberg.
Okay. Tom, do you still want to talk?
Not really, but just a question.
Oh, wait, then Teresa, you're next after that?
She's not here.
Okay, and I'll hold her.
I'm just wondering, given the fact that we're not doing anything, do people still want to speak? I mean, you're welcome, okay.
Actually, I would like to, yes. And it's a very simple question.
So, wait, so the next speaker will be Ellie. You'll be next.
I would just like to ask, what is the target date for the recommendation that comes back here before you discuss it? And how will you notify the residents of that date of that meeting in which you'll discuss the recommendation? We've had problems in the past of issues.
No, I hear you.
You only notify residents within 100 feet or 200 feet, and
I can't address the notification part. We're trying to work this as fast as we can.
Yeah,
but
we-
we're all
okay.
We're
we're all
trying to.
volunteers as well.
Yeah.
We're trying to work our schedules and figure out who's available when.
But we're
Your
trying
best
to,
guess would be helpful.
we're trying to be here for the next meeting.
Okay.
But we can't guarantee it.
We can't.
But
Certainly.
honestly, I would recommend, just like everybody saw the agenda, just keep an eye out for the agenda. We'll try to notice it, but if we put the notice it, that means it's going to go 2 weeks ahead in advance, right?
Yeah,
So,
That's helpful. I understand you can't
Yeah.
pick
Yeah,
an exact
James,
date.
as far as notification?
Well, if this does move forward as a project, there will be widespread notification, but what residents
yeah,
can...
right now it's just a discussion.
Right, yeah.
Pardon me?
I said
Right now it'd
it's
be a
just a
discussion,
conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
But what residents can do is subscribe to the listserv
Yeah.
on the city's website, and they'll
Okay.
get copies of all of the planning commission's agendas.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. The next speaker I have is Greg Bunker.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eli Alchek, and I live in Los Altos for 45 years. And I moved my office to Los Altos 35 years ago. Some 30 years ago, the city council felt that the best thing for Loyola Corners is to appoint a committee that consisted of 4 homeowners, 4 business owners, 4 commercial property owners, and 2 people from the Planning Commission to determine the future of Loyola Corners. We worked on the project, meeting every other week for a period of 2 years. We used consultants regarding traffic, regarding environmental impact, regarding architecture. Architects we used, all to come at the end with this specific plan that was unanimously approved by the committee and by the city at that time. So I do not understand how you can appoint committees or subcommittees without getting involved the people that the city council at the time felt are important that they will participate in that process and make a decision or recommendation of modifying that specific plan. So this is a question that I'd like to hear answer. I don't think that first you have the authority for that. You're not following the guidelines that the city council set for the future of that corner.
So I can answer that really quick. We're just making a recommendation as to what to do to proceed with the specific plan, not to make any recommendations or anything else. But, I mean, not towards the plan itself as far as changing it. We just want to say, these are the elements that need to be updated, and this is the process we believe that would make it work. And that we would have that conversation amongst us to then report to City Council so that they can decide what to do next. It's not to make any modifications to the plan itself.
So,
And you feel that you could do that
So-
without consulting?
So, for example, we noticed Appendix B is out of date. It has 1980 information, not 2015 and 2012. So we wanted to find out what should we do to update that section.
so if I can just clarify, I think you were here when we talked about the agenda item right before this, where we went through a list of items and corrected the 50-year-old date and corrected the verbiage in it. We are just looking at it to see how we can clean the language in there, just like this, where if it's an out-of-date thing, if there's something else, we are not making changes as per se. If that happened in this course of discussion and if it came up, it will definitely be something that is going to be agendized and everything. Right now, we just, when some of the projects came through, we read the language and there's some discrepancy, just like what we did right before this, where the dates are out of date and things are not correct and the terminologies have changed. And we're looking at it from that angle, at least for now. Now, if in that discussion in detail something else comes up, we will bring it to the whole commission, and then we can make a decision how we want to proceed forward. But right now, our understanding is we are not
You're not trying to change anything
We're
in the
not-
specific
No.
plan.
changing, we
wanna
are
say-
Trying to
looking.
interpret some of their thoughts there. Fine enough.
That's at least what our
That
target is, and we'll see
satisfies
how it goes.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. The next speaker I have is Mike Olchek. Is Mike here? Okay. He still wants to speak.
Good evening. It's Greg Bunker, representing 999 Fremont Avenue. And We have started to form a group called the Loyola Corners Commercial Property Association. As you know, there's some 38 parcels owned by 23 people out there, and we certainly are available to meet with the committee anytime regarding our future. And we want to just reiterate that we are there to protect our viability as a commercial owners, that we feel we are going to be lobbying to not have any, certainly, downzoning of our properties. In other words, we feel very critical about 3 stories availability to the development process as it moves forward. I think that the project at 999 Fremont Avenue has sparked some attention amongst other people looking to reinvest in their commercial property at Loyola Corners. I understand that U.S. Bank is perhaps going to be redeveloped. This is what the rumor is about. So we probably have 4 parcels now at the intersection that are looking for guidance. And thank you very much.
Next speaker after Mike I have is Gary Ross.
I'll go ahead and pass.
Okay. After that is Debbie Skelton. You still want to speak? Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. I apologize for my informal attire. I actually only heard about this meeting about 75 minutes before it began. I would suggest that the statements made by Commissioners tonight about notice and its importance are inaccurate. This would be a lie to suggest for even half a minute that this isn't a tremendously controversial topic with tremendous community interest. I think you should absolutely have notices sent to any property owner in the area before you have any discussion about the area, period. And you may not be responsible for those notices, but I don't think that there should be any hearing regarding this specific plan without properly noticing the area, particularly because of the significant amount of community interest. I stand before you today as the president of the newly appointed president of the Loyola Corners Commercial Property Association. We are beginning to mobilize. Part of that mobilization effort is in direct response to what I would suggest has been a bit of hostility on that we've received from this commission and the project applicants who have come before this commission have received. And I think that to some extent we're a little disappointed with what I would call a lack of accountability and to some extent unprofessionalism. There have been Brown Act violations recently with respect to correspondence about this topic. I've met with Community Development Director Walgren, General City Manager Summers, and Mayor Pepper just last week, and suggested that any process that involved amending this specific plan should absolutely include a panel of different perspectives. I know that you have not reached out to any of the business owners individually or as a group to interact with us about what we think is important. You heard tonight from a resident who's supposedly a business consultant that's consulting for businesses in the area that the vacancies are low and everything's great. If you know your community, then you know that there are pop-ups in downtown Los Altos that are not paying rent, that landowners have to do a tremendous amount to get retail to work. So just because you see no vacancy doesn't mean that those areas are performing well. And I think part of what will help shed light on the performance is including commercial property owners and business owners as this discussion. I think you've demonstrated a tremendous amount of respect for the residents, and you seem to be voicing their concerns loudly. But I don't think that you've taken the time to include us in your process, and part of that is a problem. I think that the idea of sort of unilateral, I agree that you've created a panel to discuss what to do about the plan, but your discussion has also talked about the idea of limiting development to 2 stories. It was actually in the minutes. It said here.
I have to stop you. It's 3 minutes.
Okay, well, there's a lot more to say here, and I really hope that the city sort of rethinks this effort because there's a lack of transparency.
Can I just respond real quick? Just want to clarify just with our earlier statement up here. Right now, the subcommittee, as we are calling it, just because we all volunteers, not everybody can be on that committee, and we don't want any issue with the majority in there. We are really looking at, as we specifically said, because of these projects, some of the terminology and the language in the specific plan. And I would like to reiterate that if, while doing that research, if there is any item that we think needs to be changed, it will come up as a discussion to the commission, and then, of course, there will be a process which will follow where, if we need, we are not at this point looking at making, we are correcting languages and things that we think are going to be a little bit more clear. Just wanted to clarify that.
With all due
just
respect,
so we
this
know.
is following basically two applicants' proposals that have been almost unilaterally objected to, have gone through multiple meetings and with an inability to sort of determine any kind of direction. So you're responding to an effort to actually develop in the area, and the first paragraph of the minutes suggests that there could be a modification of the CN zone regulations, such as only allowing 2 stories on Fremont Avenue and requiring setbacks for 3rd stories, and suggesting committees to change the design guidelines. So I just think there's a lot of I think that Community Development Director Walgren idea of your authority here, and what I think you guys anticipate is if the sole purpose of the committee is to decide, yes, we should change it, and I'm not entirely sure that the meeting lasts more than 5 minutes. But even that decision, in the absence of community input from business owners and commercial property owners, seems very isolated and in a vacuum. And tonight has been a demonstration that there's some individuals who think that the community is succeeding. And as a commercial property owner with over 25,000 square feet of space there, who's actively trying to rent it for value, I can tell you that looks can be deceiving. And so I just want to...
And we understand that. And I'll just close on one thing. You can take a seat. But I'll just close on one thing. Coming back to, there's always a reaction because of something. The discussions we've had just prior to this about basement ordinance and things is because something happened, and then we realized there are some loopholes and something needs to be cleared up. But I will say it again, there is, at least where the committee is concerned, there is transparency. We are not looking at making any changes, but if during that process something does come up, it will be communicated and it'll be noticed, and we'll do the whole thing, for sure. That's it.
So Debbie, and then Stephen Moore? Still
Hello.
want to speak?
Thank you all very much for the work.
Before you
you're
start,
putting-
Debbie, let me just make sure. And the last speaker I have is Teresa Morris. You still want to speak? No? Okay. Okay. So you'll be the last speaker. Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I want to ask, okay, so Mr. Bunker is bringing 999 Fremont before City Council on July 28th. And I guess the elephant in the room here is that the Loyola Corners specific plan indicates that we can do 2-story buildings, and also calls out how much of that would be residential and how much could be residential and how much needed to be commercial. So the 2 applicants that are up and coming want to do 3 stories, and so you're saying that the specific plan is not going to change anything dynamic, any of the big items. So that's the piece that everybody, I think, is concerned and wants to talk about, is that, right now it's 2 stories, and 2 developers want to do 3 stories. So I suppose what everyone here has been saying is that if we're going to make substantial changes, then I guess we do need the big committee, the residents, the business owners, the city representatives, and so forth. And I know it's a huge and big deal, and none of us really want to open that can of worms, I suppose, but it's here, it's in front of us, it's on the table. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, how does that look for the applicant coming in on July 28th if we're not there yet on how the specific plan looks? And so that's sort of a question.
I can't.
Say something, please.
No, I can't. I already had a chance. But James, I don't know what the question is.
So the
I don't know.
question is-
The City
I'm sorry.
Council is going to be discussing something that's their purview, and all we're doing is noticing that the Loyola specific plan was out of date, and we didn't know how to go about looking at.
I know.
And that's why we're spending time to meet, to talk about what we think should be done or what needs to be done, and then present it to the group to say, this is what we think, rather than us conversing hours over it.
I totally get it, but
So,
that
James-
one piece of the Loyola plan that we're talking about is just outdated data. And so I get that that's what you're looking to correct, but I think what the community is looking at is some major development and guidelines according to that. And so my question then is, how does the city council view this when the applicant comes in on July 28th? If the specific plan says 2 stories and we haven't addressed that yet?
It just says, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's whatever the specific plan says. I don't know what it says. I don't have it in front of me, so.
So, James, maybe you can clarify for the community the process by which, or the rules by which any project will be evaluated at this point in time.
Any
It's by the
application
existing rules,
that's
is that
been
correct?
submitted to the city and accepted to the city is required to be evaluated under the rules and policies that are in place when that application was submitted. So even if the Planning Commission did recommend to the City Council that we develop a process to update the specific plan, it would not affect a project like 999 Fremont, for example. Right.
So,
Okay, thank you.
do you want to speak now? If you come up to the mic so that it can be recorded. You're Teresa Morris?
No, Maria Gonzalez. Just asking if I can.
She said she doesn't have one.
Oh,
She
okay.
didn't have a paper.
So will you fill it out afterwards, just so we have a record of it?
You can speak, but you can fill it off later.
Thank you.
My name is Maria Gonzalez. I'm the owner of Tom's Depot, the business. I just wanted to say something about that I feel I need to talk. I've been there for 14 years. I started that business. I never had a restaurant before, so my husband and I work very hard with my family, and thank God I have a successful business. Every year is going up, and I don't have a lot of knowledge about businesses, but I observe a lot right there at Loyola Corals with the previous owners and the businesses there. And what I can see, the reason is those businesses, there's not vacancy, it's different. What I hear is not because no business, it's different things like parking is hard. And also, the other thing that I want to mention is that, like he said, nobody tells you anything, but somehow because this lovely neighborhood, kind and caring, and people that cares, I heard about these meetings because my landlord never told me anything, so I had to find out from someone else, and she's still not telling me anything, so that's why I'm here to listen and to be informed of what's going on. But it's the lack of business there is not just, it's something that everybody needs to put in. Even business owners and landlords get together and talk to us because nobody has talked to me but the neighborhood. So all I wanted to say is that.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? So if you don't mind filling out a green card, ma'am? Is it in there? Yeah, thank you. Is there anybody else? Then I'll close public comment. Is there any conversation amongst the commission?
No, I think you just.
You did say that we would get something from the subcommittee as soon as possible, either the next meeting or the meeting after. And my understanding from what you said is that you are looking at what parts are the kind of outdated writing that we just reviewed on our general zoning code. And once we know what the targets are, then we will have a discussion. It will be an agenda item, and the public will have availability of noticing because it will be in the published agenda. Go to it, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're having a blast doing it.
Anybody else? Okay. Last item is commissioners' reports and comments.
That was me, council meeting. So the thing I think that is more related to us, I don't know if you saw the town crier, was the appeal that went in front of the council for the single-family home.
That's the Design Review Commission's.
So, yeah, this is the DRC's, and so the interesting thing was DRC had actually approved it with conditions. But they had asked for some conditions, and apparently the designer had agreed to them. But later on, the owners did not agree to those conditions, and so it went for an appeal to council, and council actually approved their application with whatever the applicant wanted. It was a very cute house. I don't know if you guys saw the rendering in the town crier. It was, and the entire neighborhood was actually in support of the project. And the discussion was more because, apart from one more house, the rest of the neighborhood was very consistent, and this was a difference in the neighborhood, which was new. So I think apart from that, James, I don't know if you remember anything else, but I don't think there was anything else which kind of related to us. This was it, right? Yeah.
I think it's significant that this is the second time that City Council has taken a recommendation of one of their commissions and completely ignored them.
Is it the second or?
Yeah, that's the
more?
second Design Review Commission
I think it's more than the
that I know of.
Isn't it?
At least two.
I
At
think
least
it's
two.
3, or is it 2?
There's three.
Three.
And then there's, of course, when
3.
Planning and Transportation Commission makes similar recommendations and is completely ignored as well. I think it's an interesting commentary on the new City Council. I would like to suggest a new item for potential future agenda items, which is to review what we had talked about, which is that the threshold for correcting nonconforming setbacks in R1 districts come back for
I agree.
future discussion.
Agreed.
And that means like we'll get some data for
Well, the
that.
other item would be the common parking
Yes, and the
distance
Well, we're going to provide that
That's gonna go to the
information in
city
the council
council.
report.
at the city, so we won't have a.
No. But I'll share it with the commission because it's a published number.
The only thing I would want to report is that I will not be at the next commission meeting. I'll be out of
So
town.
who is the
What's
My
the
my
date on
great
that?
friend, it's August
August 3rd.
6th.
August 3rd?
6th?
I won't either.
6th, 5th.
I won't either.
Yeah, 6, August 6th.
August
Actually,
6th.
I think it's a good idea if we don't do it as a, I mean, I do it in general, but I think all of us as a rule should, if you're not going to be there, not only you can announce it here, but if you tell staff and you tell the chair,
Right.
then we can make sure that there's a quorum when we need it.
So Mike, write yourself a memo, please.
Yes.
James, what?
2 are down.
What is on the agenda for the August 6th meeting?
Abby, I think, is on the Enchère, whatever, I can't,
Yeah.
the hotel,
Okay.
Enchante,
Yes.
use permit
right.
is on, I heard.
Yes, that's correct.
I don't know if
That was
there's
just
anything else.
published.
I'm not sure what else is on that agenda, but the hotel use permit reconsideration, or not reconsideration, a consideration is on the agenda.
And then depending on how our
Then depending on how
committee
fast
thing
or-
goes,
yeah,
we,
that would be the other item.
yeah.
With two commissioners gone and one having to recuse herself,
If Loyola Corners comes up.
yeah, that's bad timing. I don't think you want to do that.
So that'll
Loyola.
automatically push it
What?
off.
Loyola should
Yeah,
not be
the-
on.
Right, you
yeah, I
don't
would-
want to do that kind of thing when there's three commissioners.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a good point. We won't put it on the
So
6th.
we'll just move it,
To August 20th.
whatever the next.
Which would be probably when we'll be.
August 20th? Yeah.
20th,
I'm in town.
I'm in town.
yeah,
I'm not gonna, yeah.
perfect.
Do I need to still notify you that I won't make the?
No, I just did,
You've
right?
done it in public, it's fine.
I just
You've
knocked
done
over
a
the
great
water.
job, Jerry.
And
So is there anything else that anybody needs to disclose?
Nope.
Seeing none, I will close the commission meeting.